All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I am Andrew, aka Possessed Mindgasms, for the purposes of this video. And I am talking about my next paragraph in my favorite post-structuralist and so-called postmodernist philosopher, French philosopher from the 70s, Foucault. And I'm going to do my next video in his History of Sexuality his on his book called History of Sexuality. So if you've been following along, you'll know some of the general themes. But yeah, it's a really fascinating book. And so check out all my previous videos on it too. So this paragraph that I'm going to read and comment on here is about what he calls the technology of sex. He talks about possession. Basically, he doesn't use the word, but basically what he's describing is eugenics. He talks about state surveillance and pedagogy. And oh yeah, I forgot I was going to pull this up. I forgot what pedagogy means. I've definitely read it before, but I forgot what it means. So I looked it up, and apparently it's the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept, or the relationship between applied linguistics and language pedagogy. And it also says here, pedagogy, most commonly understood as the approach to teaching, is a theory and practice of learning and how this process influences and is influenced by social, political, and psychological development of learners. Oh, okay. So how your culture affects the way that you learn. And yeah, I guess kind of like that. And it's kind of a sociological uh, examination of these kind of topics, where rather than, well, it's kind of a yeah, sociological and philosophical exploration of these topics and just describing the way that things are. But anyway, he gets into all sorts of fascinating topics. So um, that's pedagogy, and basically he connects all of these very different and complex topics into one enormous and uh, abstract and pedantic paragraph, as he is often prone to do. All right, so I will start reading the paragraph here and stop a bunch of times to comment on it. I'm going to put my glasses on for this. Okay. It was during the same period, the end of the 18th century, and for reasons that will have to be determined, that there emerged a completely new technology of sex. New in that, for the most part, it escaped the ecclesiastical institution without being truly independent of the thematics of sin. So, this is a sort of a similar type of explanation that he's used before. Basically, he's saying, like, he's kind of making the point that there are cultural remnants of the idea of sin in the culture, even after the ecclesiastical institution stopped prohibiting them, like the church stopped forbidding them, and perhaps the state stopped forbidding them too. There were still remnants of this idea of sin in the culture, where it's still seen as a holy, like, failure to be sinning. That's pretty much what it probably means within the context of the book. Okay, so through pedagogy, so but I think what he means in the context of this paragraph, he just means, like, kind of learning, and kind of from the perspective of what he's talking about, this probably kind of propaganda. Anyway, through pedagogy, medicine, and economics, it made sex not only a secular concern, but a concern of the state as well. Okay, so he talks about, this is how he gets complex and multifactorial all the time in his explanations for things. He's talking about how it's not just uh, the like pedagogy, medicine, and economics the made science made sex a concern of the state, because the way he's talked about it before is that sex was looked at medically through the institution of science and medicine in a way that it had never been described. Oh, sorry, I just was making sure this is streaming. So, yeah, so sex was medicalized, I think you could say, in a way that it never was before by the institutions of medicine and science. So that would be the way that it was a concern of the state. Well, I guess that I guess that would be more like pedagogy in particular, if especially if we're talking about state education systems, and it depends on your healthcare system, obviously, in terms of whether that has anything to do with the state, and economics, of course, too. That has something to do with the state because the state decides what to use as a form of monetary value, obviously, right? Okay, so it made sex not only a secular concern, but a concern of the state as well. To be more exact, sex became a matter that required the social body as a whole and virtually all of its individuals to place themselves under surveillance. So, again, within the context of the themes that Foucault talks about in this book, it seems like what he's saying is basically that he's talking about kind of a form of self-surveillance. Like he says, they're placing themselves under surveillance because due to the pedagogy of the state and the ecclesiastical institutions penetrating the culture, people have this like psychological feeling of being conscious of sinning when they're having sex and defying the state if especially if we're talking about examples that Foucault has used before, like for example uh like anal sex being illegal. What is it he uses? Oh yeah, he uses the actual word sodomy. Like even if you're heterosexual people and want to do anal or something like that, then that's considered gay. So that was outlawed during the Enlightenment by the state and by the institutions of science and well, medicalized by science and seen as a medical flaw, and then also seen as a sin by the institution of the church. Anyway, so where were we? Oh, the social body as a whole and virtually all of its individuals to place themselves under surveillance. New too for the fact that it expanded along three axes, that of pedagogy, having as its objective the specific sexuality of children. So, what he's talking about in terms of this, if you know from me, my previous videos on when he's talking specifically about that in other paragraphs, by the sexuality of children, um, pedagogy. Yeah, so the objective of pedagogy is the sexuality of children. I think that he means in terms of the institutions sexualizing children in terms of, you know, looking at ways to problematize just natural development during puberty and that sort of thing. So, you know, teaching yourself that it's a sin to be going through puberty and be aroused by girls if you're a guy, or you know it's a sin to have your period or something like that, or like especially early on in science before we learned more, you know, you could be seen as problematic, or there could still be religious ideas that were looked at scientifically of women not supposed to being around men during their period or some ridiculous shit like that. And and so and then we're talking about basically childhood development and the ways that the institutions of science and religion can problematize that, and they did during the Enlightenment. And you can say the same thing about the state too. That's the same sort of thing in, if we're talking about government schools, for example, then it's seen as inappropriate to be going through puberty if you're a boy or a girl, or just being younger than that and not knowing what these things are, like accidentally touching a penis or a vagina or some shit as you're a kid and you don't know any better, and getting punished for that without being educated to what it is that you did and why it is apparently wrong. Like, it's just a thing that's not supposed to be talked about. And then because there's this double meaning that happens that Foucault talks about, because it's a taboo, it makes everyone talk about it and in private, and it makes it more seductive because it's a taboo. But then in public, people are strictly forbidding it simultaneously. Okay, so New for the fact that it expanded along three axes: that of pedagogy, having as its objective the specific sexuality of children; that of medicine, whose objective was the sexual physiology peculiar to women. Oh, okay. So if he's talking about this specifically, then if we're talking about the way the Enlightenment liked to medicalize people during uh, or the way the institution of science and medicine liked to medicalize people during the Enlightenment. One of the Basically, it sounds like he's saying the main way that they did that was to make it seem like you can see a lot of early scientific work, for example, showing that women are genetically inferior and they're genetically less intelligent, and they're, yeah, just basically inferior, and forming scientific justifications for why women should just be men's property and second class citizens, and that sort of shit. And probably like what I was saying before, like how periods are some sort of there's some sort of medically bad thing in some sort of way. um, Okay, so sexual physiology peculiar to women, and last, that of demography, whose objective was the spontaneous or concerned regulation of birth rates. So this is where he starts to get into like fascinating and wild shit. So the basically the demography, like a group of people, I think that's what he means, but he might mean something different in the context of this. To Is the spontaneous or concerted regulation of births. So the regulation of birth rates. That's obviously a thing that states have done many times throughout the Enlightenment and throughout history, and used the institute, and the states have use eugenics and justified it with the institutions of science and religion, like Sin saying that whoever needs to be subjected to eugenics is sinning, or the institution of the Church of Religion, and the institution of science and medicine saying that these people are medically and scientifically inferior, right? So there we go. Thus the quote unquote sin of youth, quote unquote nervous disorder, and quote unquote frauds against procreation. Those are very familiar terms where we're talking about states practicing eugenics to cause a decline in birth rate of people they see as inferior to themselves, right? Okay, I'm gonna take a little drink here. Yeah, it's a long ass paragraph as usual for Foucault, of course. All right. Anyway, and quote unquote frauds against procreation, rather. as those deadly secrets were later to be called, designate three privileged areas of this new technology. So he's talking about basically, this is how complex Foucault gets. He's talking about the technology of the pedagogy, um, the technology of the pedagogy, medicine, and demography, which you can look at, as I was saying, through the institutions of religion or the church, and science or medicine and the state. Um, and that is like, basically it sounds like he's describing kind of technology as a form of propaganda perpetuated throughout these institutions during the Enlightenment. He doesn't use that word, though. He's very specific to avoid that word, which I appreciate, because he's not nearly as radical as you can see as anyone like fucking Jordan Peterson or James Lindsay or any number of other people make him out to be. Anyway, let's see. As those deadly secrets were later to be called, designate three privileged areas of this new technology. There's no question that in each of these areas, it went back to methods that had already been formed by Christianity. So obviously, Christianity spread basically did the same sort of thing, spread propaganda through the institution of the church slash religion. Obviously, specifically is what he's talking about here, and did the exact sort of the same sort of things too. Sexualized children through looking at that through the lens of sin, looked at women as sexually sinning just for being women, and uh, had definitely practiced some eugenics and regulated births of people who they saw as, like sinners or unholy in comparison to themselves. Okay. Problematizing the spiritual pedagogy of Christianity. It is interesting to note that Maimonides, the first treatise on sin, was written in the 15th century by an educator and mystic named Gerson, and that the Onania collection compiled by Decker in the 18th century repeats word for word examples set forth by the Anglican Pastoral. I'm not familiar with any of those guys' names, but obviously they have to do with the Anglican Pastoral. The 18th century medicine of nerves and vapors so he's talking about basically junk science perpetuated by institutions during the institution of science and medicine during the Enlightenment era. Medicine of nerves and vapors took up in turn a field of analysis that had already been delimited when the phenomena of possession there you go, using nerves and vapors to cure possession. So false science perpetuated by the religion of science, a tool from the religion of science used to basically get rid of the false religious institution problem of possession. Um, Two indiscrete practices of conscience, direction, and spirit. Oh, I think I went forward too far here. Field of nerves and vapors took up in turn a field of analysis that had already been delimited when the phenomena of possession, there you go, fomented a grave crisis in the all too indiscreet practices of conscience, discretion, conscience direction, and spiritual examination. Nervous illness is certainly not the truth of possession, but the medicine of hysteria is not unrelated to the earlier direction of obsessed women. Oh yeah, this was really common. Definitely at the start of the field of psychology. I've made videos before about some interesting points that Freud has made, but it was really common in early psychology to do what Freud did, and diagnosing women as hysterical or something like that. So they did that with cases of supposed possession as well. And I'm not sure. I guess at this point, they the institution of science didn't know that, uh, you know, seizures that happen are not from possession, they're from epilepsy. That's why, because I have epilepsy, I often think about how if I lived during biblical times, or for most of human history even, I probably would have been executed for being a demon because I would have had seizures and they thought I was possessed. But anyway, phenomena to, but the medicine of hysteria is not unrelated to the earlier direction of obsessed women. It's really similar to this, to the institution of medicine having the objective of sexual physiology peculiar to women, as he mentioned before, right? You know, women are just obsessed, and that's what's actually happening with possession. It's this medical diagnosis, and they use medical diagnosis from the institution of science that they use as a tool to cure the false problem, the false religious problem from the institution of the state that is possession. Like I said before, that's too much of a mouthful. Anyway, but the medicine. Oh, and the campaigns apropos of the birth rate took the place of the control of conjugal relations in a different form and at another level, which the Christian penance had so persistently sought to establish through its examinations. A visible continuity, therefore, but one that did not prevent a major transformation. From that time on, the technology of sex was ordered in relation to the medical institution, the exigency of normality, and instead of the question of death and everlasting punishment, the problem of life and illness. The flesh was brought down to the level of the organism. Oh, that's interesting. So I got a little lost there at first, but with the last sentence, that makes sense and puts it in context to me. So if he's saying the flesh was brought level down to the level of the organism, then he's basically, if we're following the same themes that he copies, well, that he follows throughout the book, you could say that, so the flesh was brought down to the level of the organism means that human, like people, human beings, human bodies were reduced by the institution of science to nothing but our bodies. And then similarly, the institution of church or religion reduced us to nothing but our bodies when declaring people to be sinful, like declaring gay people to be sinful for being gay, as I've talked about, as Foucault mentions many times before, and as you know, the institution seeing them as of medicine and science, seeing them as medically flawed, and then in many cases the state using the form of using the scientific tool of eugenics to euthanize and sterilize gay people, and they did that with countless other groups of people throughout history, obviously, too, right? So anyway, yeah, I think that's a really fascinating and complex paragraph from Foucault, as usual. And also, as usual, it's such a long, complex, verbose, and abstract paragraph that I thought it made sense to just do another video about a single paragraph of it. I like doing these deep dive philosophy videos. All right. So, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you appreciated my reading and explanation of and commentary on this latest paragraph of Foucault's book, The History of Sexuality. And like I said, check out my other videos about it if you like philosophy and me nerding out on philosophy like this. And there will be plenty of others. And also doing a deep dive philosophical series on Slavoj Žižek, the Hegelian / Marxist / Hegelian philosopher's book called Less Than Nothing. So check those videos out as well, and all of my other videos about philosophy. I did one. Well, I guess the most recent one I probably did that was philosophical about other content was probably the one that I did on the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and about how it's postmodern art. which is connected to this demonization of so-called postmodernism that I defend with my explanation of the books of people like Foucault. So anyway, yeah, check out all of that awesome content, and probably won't be doing any podcasts this weekend because I'm going to be going out of town, but next weekend I'm going to probably be doing that podcast with my friends Dusty and Chris about George Orwell's Animal Farm, the famous, basically anti-Stalinist book. So check that out as well. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Click that like button, share this everywhere, share the fascinating ideas of Foucault, and show that he's not the fucking radical evil person that people like Jordan Peterson paint him as at all, not even close. And click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of the video, as always. And most importantly, always remember this. I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. Oh, and even more importantly, always remember this. The funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Foucault is awesome and fascinating. The people who demonize him, as I always say, have clearly not actually read his books, because everything they say about him is a straw man. All right. So thanks everyone again, and adios until next time.